Shavua Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Shabbat. We are up to Perek Tedvav, Mishna Aleph. Today's Mishnah should be Leilu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Aranbaev, and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam beGan Eden. Amen. The first two Mishnayot of this chapter discuss the melachot of tying and untying knots. The Mishnah begins, Elu kisharim shechayivin alehen. These are the knots for which one is liable on Shabbat. Kesher gamalin, the camel driver's knot, meaning the knot used to permanently tie a strap to the pierced nose of a camel, which the commentaries explain a leather strap was inserted through a hole pierced in the nose of the camel, and its ends were tied together with the permanent knot, forming a ring. When the animal had to be secured, a rope was tied between this ring and a post in the ground. When the camel was released, the rope was undone, but the ring always remained in place. Again, whoever has the opportunity to look at an illustrated Mishnah to visualize the case, but that's the first case in the Mishnah. Kesher gamalin, the camel driver's knot. The kesher sapanin, and the sailor's knot, meaning the knot used to permanently tie a strap to a hole in the front of a boat, which the commentaries explain. A hole was made in the prow of a ship through which a rope was inserted and tied to form a permanent ring. To tether the ship while in dock, a long rope was tied from the ring to a post upon land. When the ship left, the long rope was untied, but the ring was left in place. Ukshem shehu chayav al kishuran, kachu chayav al heteran. Now, before we continue, the commentaries write, since these knots are permanent, like the knots that were used in the Mishkan, one is liable for tying them on Shabbat. And the Rav explains, if a thread in one of the Mishkan's curtains broke, craftsmen tied the ends together with a permanent knot. Now, Shem shehu chayav al kishuran, kachu chayav al heteran. Just as one is liable for tying them because they are like those that were tied in the Mishkan, as we just explained, so too one is liable for untying them because they are like those that were untied in the Mishkan. And the Rav explains, fishing nets were used to trap the chilazon, a small aquatic creature whose secretion is tchelet, the special blue dye used in some of the curtains and coverings of the Mishkan. These nets were made of ropes tied together with permanent knots. Sometimes it was necessary to untie ropes from some nets and tie them to other nets for the purpose of making them smaller or larger. Now, although the ropes were occasionally untied, the net markers used permanent knots to tie them in the first place, since most of them were never untied. Now, since the previous Tana does not say otherwise, we see that he holds that one is always liable for making a knot like a camel driver's knot or a sailor's knot, regardless of whether it can be untied easily, because since the knot is of such a type that when left alone, it will remain in place indefinitely, it's considered permanent. But the next Tana disagrees. Rabbi Meir says, Kol kesher shu yachol atiro ba'achat miyadav, any knot that one can untie with just one of his hands, and hayavin alav, one is not liable for tying it since it can be undone so easily. It's regarded as a temporary knot for which one is not liable. Now the Rav explains, even if a person makes a knot that resembles a camel driver's knot or a sailor's knot, and he intends it to remain forever, but he ties it so loosely that someone can untie it with one hand, Rabbi Meir exempts him from liability. And the Rav tells us, Ven halacha ki Rabbi Meir, the halacha does not follow Rabbi Meir. And that is in Rabotai of Mishnah Aleph. Mishnah Ben now deals with knots that are forbidden only rabbinically or permitted altogether, unlike what we saw in Mishnah Aleph, biblically prohibited knots. The Mishnah begins, Yesh lecha kesharim shen chayivin alem kekesher gamalin ukekesher sapanin. There are knots for which one is not liable, as one is liable for the camel driver's knot and the sailor's knot, meaning it is not biblically prohibited to tie a temporary type of knot, one that is usually left tied for only a week or two. For example, the Rav brings down the type of knot used to attach a rope to a camel's nose ring or attach a rope to the ring in a ship's prow. One does not use a permanent type of knot for this purpose because a camel or ship is sometimes tethered for only a week or two, after which the knot is untied. Now, even such knots, however, are banned midrabanan under rabbinic law because they resemble permanent knots and that they remain in place for a significant period. But the following knots are permitted to be tied on Shabbat because they do not even resemble permanent knots. Kosheret isha miftach halukah. A woman may tie the openings of her blouse v'chutei sivacha v'shel pisikya, and the laces of a bonnet or a girdle. Again, whoever has the illustrated Mishnah to visualize the cases. Utsuot min'al v'sandal, and one may tie the straps of a shoe or sandal, v'nodot yain v'shemen, the openings of flasks of wine or oil. And the Rav explains, in order to close these flasks, which were made of leather, one ties down the flaps of the opening. Ukdera shel basar, and a cloth that covers a pot of meat, which the Rav explains, a cloth would sometimes be tied over a pot of meat to prevent dirt from falling in it. Now, in each of these cases, the knot is untied on the same day that it's tied, therefore does not resemble a permanent knot at all, and is permitted even under rabbinic law. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, one may tie a rope in front of an animal to keep it from getting out, because this type of knot too is untied on the same day that it is tied. And the Rav says, V'chen halacha, that's the halacha. Mishnah continues, Koshrin dili bifsikya, one may tie a bucket to the top of a well with the lace of a girdle, because since one needs the lace for its regular purpose, one will not leave it permanently tied to the bucket and well. Rather, one will untie it the same day, and after he has finished using it to draw water. But one may not tie the bucket with a rope, because the rope would be left there permanently. Rabbi Yehuda matir, however, Rabbi Yehuda permits tying the bucket even with the rope, because the Rav says Rabbi Yehuda refers only to a weaver's rope. Since the weaver needs it for his work, he will untie it from the bucket and weld the same day. But the previous Tana, though, forbids using even a weaver's rope, because people might confuse it with other types of rope and mistakenly think that one may use any type of rope to attach to a bucket as well. And the Rav tells us, V'anacha kichachamim, the halacha follows the opinion of the sages that you are not allowed to tie it even with a weaver's rope. And the Mishnah concludes now with a general principle. Klal amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda stated a rule about knots. Kol kesher sheno shel kayama en hayavin alav. Any knot that is not permanent, one is not liable for tying it. Now, Rabbi Yehuda refers to the Mishnah's opening statement where there are knots for which one is not liable. Here he explains that it applies to knots that are not permanent. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Everybody should have a Shavua Tov. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.